residents see it as overkill. As you mentioned, there's already 4 McDonald's within 5 minutes drive of this proposed one, and one of those is literally 800 metres up the road on General Holmes Drive, and that's a 24/7 Macca's. So the local residents, it's smack bang in the middle of a residential area. You've got people that will be living literally next door to it and across the road. They've got young families, young kids that are trying to do their homework and sleep at night, and on that basis, they're opposed to it.
Okay. Well, I'm reading also that perhaps it's not. Can you confirm here that it's not smack bang in front of housing, but it's surrounded by a petrol station, a tile manufacturer, plumbing supplies company. There is new housing development nearby, but are people actually going to be living kind of across the road, right on top of it?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
It's literally across the road from residential housing on Botany Road. It is true that there's a petrol station that's adjacent to it, and that's an issue as well, because that petrol station has been applying on a number of occasions to go 24/7, but it's been knocked back in the past because of the effect that would have on local residents, and many of those residents see if this McDonald's is approved, that will set the precedent for other businesses in the area. So 12,000 people have signed the petition against it, and they just see it as a bit of overkill when there's other McDonald's restaurants that are close by.
Okay, ultimately, whose decision is this?
So it'll go to a local planning panel, which is independent, and they'll have to assess it against the guidelines. But there's also issues associated with traffic. You're going to see increased traffic, and the local residents believe that given that it's a family-friendly area, that you've got a lot of housing around the area, that we don't need this additional traffic, this additional disruption to their lives.
And do we know of many cases where McDonald's have been chased out of a neighbourhood, really? Or, I know that I think there have been some...
I know that I think the Newtown McDonald's in the early 90s was the first McDonald's in Australia to close down from lack of patronage.
Oh, really? Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. So have you got is there any precedent for this? Do you know?
Well, I think the problem, Wendy, is that once they're established, it'll be very difficult to get rid of them. But I certainly know of communities that have banded together to oppose development applications for McDonald's. I think the most famous one of those is, of course, Byron Bay.
Yep.
But look, in this case, I've got no opposition to McDonald's restaurants. I know that they employ particularly a lot of younger people. They create jobs for local communities. I just see it as overkill in this area, given that you've got one that's 24/7, that's literally 800 metres up the road. It's not needed. There's a lot of other restaurants in this area, and they've written to me as well. They're worried about the effect that it will have on their local businesses, and we're talking mum and dad cafes and corner stores, bakeries and the like. They're all worried about this as well. So we just see it as a bit of overkill and not needed when there's one up the road.
Okay, and time frame for this?
Well, it's gone to the planning panel. I wrote my objection back in March, and hopefully they'll make a decision by the end of the year, and some of the residents can have a bit of certainty.
All right. Well, look, we'll keep abreast of it. Thanks for your time this morning, Matt.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Thistlethwaite, who is the MP, member for Kingsford Smith. He's the Shadow Assistant Minister for Financial Services as well. And, is it a Stoush? I don't know. The issue around an extra McDonald's in Botany. 12 to 2:10.
This is Breakfast
on ABC Radio Sydney.
Oh, my goodness me. I don't know who this person is who's completely lost their mind about Daniel Ricciardo winning the Oz Grand Prix, but they've written in again to say, yes, well, you just mentioned it when provoked, the great win by Daniel Ricciardo at the Italian Grand Prix last night. That's great, but it should have been on the news. He led the entire race. It was his first win since 2018, the first for Team McLaren. I've just got to tell you, I read out a text on this about 2 hours ago. Are you the same person? Let me just see.
You do a bit of research there.
I will.
Thanks,
I will
Inspector
see
Clouseau.
because this,
Come
if
back
you
to
are
us.
the same, no, you're a different person.
Hey,
We've been mentioning it all morning.
okay.
Lord.
Thanks for all your texts about fast food outlets. A few people saying they're not restaurants, They're fast food outlets. Because I called them a restaurant.
Well, they call themselves a restaurant.
Yeah. We asked what it's like living next door to a 24-hour McDonald's. So this person's saying the 24-hour McDonald's in Stanmore is awful. Smells, and loads of youth hanging around.
Yep.
No stopping signs between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. on the road beside it to stop cars gathering.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. And I don't know. Is it that bad? I live virtually next door to Macca's on Military Road in Cremorne. And I find it so convenient. I can wake up and be back in bed with a McMuffin in less than 20 minutes. so there's supports for it. Chris is in Botany. Hello, Chris.
Hey, how you going?
Good. You're in the local area. You don't work for the fast food company, do you?
No, I don't.
All right.
I just think it's a bit of a storm in a teacup. This, on the local Facebook group and stuff, you can see it. Like, it's pretty divided. Like, I think the police have jumped on this for, exposure or whatever.
I don't know, Chris. I've got a few here. Yvonne says we locals prevented a McDonald's opening in Botany Road in Rosebery in 2011. So I mean, this has happened in a few places. Avalon, there was talk of a McDonald's in Avalon years ago.
I really
huge
think
protests.
It's divided. I don't, like.
You support
the thing is, in Botany, there's only 2 roads in and out. So it's kind of difficult, at peak times, to get to the other McDonald's. And the one that's only 800 metres away, you have to get across the other side of the M5. It's not an easy drive to get there. The other thing is employment for the kids in our area. Our transport's really bad late at night. I wouldn't want my child, who is all grown up now, but I wouldn't want my child getting on and off buses late at night and walking around the streets. It's just not safe. I think it's great for our community.
Yep.
Okay.
No worries. Appreciate the call. Thank you for that.
All right. Thank you for that. And Seymour is in the Central Coast. G'day, Seymour.
Hi there, Wendy.
Your thoughts?
Listen, on Oxford Street, McDonald's tried to put a fast food chain in, and the community banded together and they got rid of it. It never got a foot in the door.
Well, it's obviously happened in a few places across the country. I take it, though, it really requires the support of the local council and the local MP, that you've got to have a bit of political muscle behind you.
I do really think people have the right to not have those kind of fast food places, because it infects children with sugar.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, okay. Thanks for that one, Seymour.
Thanks, Robbie. Bye.
Okay, cheers. I know, I do get the point. I mean, look, it is it's a pretty easy...
Do you remember the most famous fight about a McDonald's location?
No.
It was in, this is years and years ago. In fact, it was 1977. And it was Bakery Hill in Ballarat. And it was really the place where the insurgents swore the oath to the Eureka flag.
Oh.
Yeah, and they wanted to put a McDonald's there, and there was a huge outcry about that one. So I think, from memory, I think they won. And the McDonald's had to go sort of somewhere else. But that was, I remember that very clearly, really high-profile fight. I think all of Australia knew about that.
Well, Narelle in Gladesville says, I went on my walk near the Gladesville Macca's yesterday, and the quantity of branded garbage in the streets nearby is appalling. They should be required to clean it up. I know that's been a big issue for Stanmore, because a lot of people go through the drive-through, sit and eat it in their car, and then do the wrong thing and chuck it out their windows, and it lands on the path. But yeah, whether or not the staff there are sent out to clean it up, I don't know. Yeah. Thank you for all that. Who would have thought we'd get into a debate around that? But there it is. I just was listening to that little promo from Sarah McDonald earlier on, and she was talking about Nile Rodgers helping out David Bowie and the Let's Dance album and the huge hit that it became, and it just was too enticing to go past. So
You and your David Bowie,
there it is.
Put on your red shoes and
there he is, the great Mr. Bowie, and the wonderful chirpy guitar of Nile Rodgers, giving it the funk elements. What year do you reckon?
Oh, gosh.
1983.
All righty.
There it is.
Now, I've looked at what happened at the Battle of Bakery Hill in Ballarat. That was when McDonald's wanted to demolish all the buildings there on the site of where they swore an oath to the Eureka flag. Huge backlash. I remember this. It went national, this story. Norm Gallagher from the Builders Labourers Federation put a ban on it, etc. In the end, what happened was they came to a compromise and they restored the old buildings, and McDonald's is within one of those buildings.
Right.
So maybe they could put that McDonald's inside the petrol station.
Oh, that's a good idea. Have your petrol and a burger.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's called vertical retailing. You know, the best vertical retailing I ever saw was in Morocco, where you could go in and you could get a few dirham of petrol and a kilo of goat
Right.
at the same time. It was genius.
Yeah, a real ideas person behind that one. Just checking the radar, and yes, I'm just seeing a few clouds coming across from the west.
That's right.
So it's on the way. Oberon Plateau at this stage, not super heavy and not super large, but some light rain on the way.
The best vertical retailing I think I probably ever saw, though, the best one that Brendan liked when we were in Ireland, and it was a hardware store and a pub.
Perfect.
Would you be happy there?
Ah, fantasy. Yeah, absolutely. Take me there now, please. We're going to get out of here.
In the town of Dingle, as it happens.
I'll bring my dongle. It's 10 o'clock, time for the news. Cassie's up next. See you tomorrow.
Boy.
It's 10 o'clock. Good morning. Tony Matthews with ABC News. The state government has confirmed compensation will be paid after it cancelled the tender process to find a development partner for the Western Harbour Tunnel. A spokesman for Transport for New South Wales says a review of submissions from 3 private consortiums found it was more efficient and economical to cancel. He says the department will manage getting contractors for the design and construction of the tunnel with an announcement next year. Shadow Treasurer Daniel Mookie says the New South Wales government needs to say just how much the changes will cost, along with the impact on the project.
What's worse, taxpayers will have to pay more as construction costs continue to climb. We need the government to be upfront about why they cancelled this tender, and we need the government to say what will be the implications of them cancelling the tender for the project's cost.
Victoria has recorded 473 new locally acquired cases of COVID-19, the highest single-day tally of the current outbreak so far. Fraser Fife has the details.
Of today's reported cases, 202 are linked to known outbreaks. There were just over 49,000 test results received yesterday, and more than 30,000 doses of vaccine were administered at state-run sites. Melbourne's northern and western suburbs remain a priority for health authorities as the government launches a community pop-up vaccination program. The state's exposure site list now includes several childcare and early learning centres as Tier 1. A community school in Fitzroy North is the latest outbreak of concern for health authorities, which is linked to at least 30 cases.
The Mayor of Woollahra, Susan Wynne, says she'd like to see schools and residents in Sydney's east have the option of a local Pfizer vaccination hub. From today, bookings for Pfizer can be made for children aged 12 to 15 through GPs and vaccination hubs. Councillor Wynne says while Sydney's west and southwest are in the greatest need, the east is lagging behind.
We definitely love a Pfizer hub out in the east. I know that sort of Homebush is available and opening up, but also for HSC students and the like. And I think there's that nervousness and sort of an assumption that everyone can just drive out to Homebush, and not everyone can, so there's the nervousness about catching public transport.
Days after stay-at-home orders were lifted in the New South Wales Riverina, the Murrumbidgee Local Health District says fragments of COVID-19 have been detected in sewage at Harden and Young. The samples were taken from 2 sewage treatment plants last Tuesday. New South Wales Health says as no recent cases have been identified in the towns, locals should immediately get tested if they notice symptoms. The Health District will set up a mobile COVID-19 testing clinic at the Young Town Hall today and Harden Hospital tomorrow. US pop star Britney Spears has announced her engagement to boyfriend Sam Asghari on Instagram. The 39-year-old posted a video of her standing next to Asghari and showing off a ring on her hand. Asghari is a personal trainer and actor who's appeared in the series Black Monday. Spears has been married twice before. World number 2, Daniil Medvedev, has claimed his first Grand Slam tennis title after beating Novak Djokovic in the US Open final 6-4, 6-4, 6-4. The Russian lost the final at Flushing Meadows 2 years ago and was booed by hostile New York tennis fans during his run. But he told ESPN this time he drew on the crowd's support.
I want to thank you guys. I mean, today maybe it was a little bit more for Novak, but that's completely understandable again. And throughout the week, you gave me a lot of energy, starting from 2019, long ago.
And tennis champion Dylan Alcott has made history, sealing the first Golden Slam of 5 tournaments by winning the US Open. Greg Jennett reports from New York City.
The 30-year-old from Melbourne had already won the Australian, French and Wimbledon wheelchair quad titles before his straight sets win at Flushing Meadows over Dutchman Niels Vink. Those 4 slams are added to Dylan Alcott's gold medal at the Tokyo Paralympics to make up the Golden Slam, never before won by any male tennis player. But the feat was also achieved by Dutch woman Dida de Groot just before the Alcott final, when she became the first female wheelchair Golden Slam champion.
Looking at the weather for New South Wales, showers with possible hail and the chance of a thunderstorm in the southeast, a shower or two elsewhere along the coast and adjacent ranges and southeastern inland. Sydney's weather, mostly sunny at first with the high chance of showers developing this afternoon, a maximum of 19 on the coast and 20 in the west. ABC News.
This is Focus
With Cassie McCullough
on ABC Radio Sydney.
Hello, good to be with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Cassie McCullough with you at the beginning of a new week. And we're off to a great start thanks to Robbie and Wendy. And also today marks the start of a small new freedom. Yes, that's right, it's picnic day. Did you ever think you'd live to see the day when you'd be granted permission by the state government to have a picnic with 4 of your friends or family and under strict conditions? Remarkable times we're living in, surely. But do we have a personal responsibility for ensuring every one of the 5 people coming to your picnic are vaccinated? And how do you go about asking? And what are some of the other scenarios that are going to arise? This is already happening. People are trying to tread these delicate social lines. We're going to talk to a ethicist, Cressida Gork-Roger, very shortly. It's a bit of an ethical minefield, and I wonder what her take is of some of the dilemmas that are arising. And I wonder if there's one in your family, your social group, amongst your colleagues. I mean, have you had to actually ask that question? Are you double vaccinated? You know, has that phrase uttered past your lips already? Tricky stuff, really tricky stuff. I'd love to hear from you. 1300 222 702. I've had a couple of things like this. A friend of mine had a baby boy just the other day. Beautiful. But along with the announcement of it was, please don't come unless you're vaccinated. And even then, under really, really strict, only through the fly screen door kind of stuff. Yeah, 1300 222 702. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And I guess also speaking of the state government this morning, it looks like the Premier's 11am COVID update is back on. So we'll bring you that after the 11 o'clock news, unless we hear information to the contrary. Yeah, so I think it's pretty safe to say the debate around vaccination is pretty much decided, and people are in favour of it or they're not, and that's their personal responsibility. Let's just hear a few of the leaders around the world talking about this. You know, Joe Biden, the US president, on Friday, he introduced measures that require large employers to ensure their employees are vaccinated. Here's him announcing that.
Tonight, I'm announcing that the Department of Labor is developing an emergency rule to require all employers with 100 or more employees that together employ over 80 million workers to ensure their workforces are fully vaccinated or show a negative test at least once a week. Some of the biggest companies are already requiring this. United Airlines, Disney, Tyson's Food, and even Fox News. The bottom line, we're going to protect vaccinated workers from unvaccinated co-workers.
There it is. There's the moral decision that's been taken by the US government, protecting vaccinated workers from the unvaccinated. It's really similar to what we heard from Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister, speaking this morning.
We are driving ahead. We now have close to 70 people who have received across our nation in the eligible group 1 inoculation, and around about half have received 2. So the job is going well. It is not finished. And of course, we also want to make sure that people get their liberties and their freedoms that they were born with back. And we're seeing that more and more and more. People they're over it. They're over having big government in their face. They want to get back to the life that they had. And we've got to be very mindful of that. We believe that towards the end of October, there will be more vaccines than there are people wanting to get vaccinated. That is, if you want to get vaccinated, you'll be able to walk into a pharmacy and get yourself vaccinated. If you choose not to, well, that is your choice, but the nation can't wait for you.
The nation can't wait for you. Yeah, strong messages, much stronger than we've heard in weeks, even up till now. Dr. Cressida Gork-Roger will join us in a moment, but let's hear from Sonia, who is in the midst of this at the moment. Good morning, Sonia.
I'm right in the middle. Good morning.
Tell us, what's happening?
I have very dear friends. I have family who are wanting to be given a choice, allowed to have a choice. They're not wanting to go with the current vaccines. They're not anti-vaxxers. They would prefer to wait for the antigen vaccination, which is the Novavax, but they feel that they're not being allowed the choice. Now, I am double-vaxxed. I had the AZ. My family and my friends, vaccinated or otherwise, will always be welcome in my home. I will not have any hesitation in visiting them, because I believe that what we're hearing about being vaccinated doesn't prevent us from actually carrying it or picking it up or, having it. It just hopefully, lessens the impact of it. But I am not going to disrespect choice and freedom of choice. I feel that people are losing their freedoms here in being allowed to choose. And there are 3 groups of people out there. There are people having the vax, there are the definite anti-vaxxers, but the group in the middle want freedom of choice for another vaccination that is on the horizon, and they're not being given the opportunity to wait for that.
That is a thorny dilemma, isn't it? Because
it is.
Yeah. Look, brilliant, Sonia. Thank you very much for that. 1300 222 702. Maybe you have a dilemma like Sonia's. Maybe this is exactly what's happening in your family right now or amongst your friends. 1300 222 702. Well, let's see what Dr. Cressida Gork-Roger thinks of this. She's a former departmental lecturer in ethics at Oxford University, and she's now a senior public policy researcher with Where To Research, and she's joining us now. Cressida, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
That's a classic scenario, isn't it? I mean, there's these people whose rights ordinarily would be completely respected, but this time is unusual.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. And I think that highlighting that there is this third group as well. So these could be people who are waiting to have the choice of a different vaccine. These could also be people who are just waiting because vaccines have only been opened up to younger people, for example, for a very limited period of time. So even if you are willing to get vaccinated, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be allowed to have a picnic on Monday with your friends straight away. And we know that the gap between first and second shots is also a decent period of time. So it might feel unfair that some people are having liberties opened up to them that you don't have. And I think everyone understands that, you know, waiting can be frustrating, but I think everyone will have an opportunity to have a vaccination and hopefully to have the vaccination of their choice. And that is one of these features of choice, that it's not the case that every choice that you have might have everything that you want about it. So you might want to wait, but that would mean that you're unable to do all the things that you want to do right now. And that's part of what you're factoring in. Or you might say, okay, look, my preference, so I'm under 40 myself, and I've had my first AstraZeneca shot because I wanted to have that sooner, and now I'm going to have to wait, you know, sometime for my second shot. I chose not to wait for the Pfizer because I wanted to get vaccinated as soon as possible. But, you know, there were reasons why some people felt that the Pfizer might be more preferable, and that's kind of part of what you factor in is, do I want to wait? How important are these different things to me? And it is unfortunate that we have to factor these in. But, you know, eventually, hopefully, all of these callers' friends will be able to get together as vaccinated people, and they might feel happy that they've made that choice, even if it came with some costs.
So this is one of the key points, isn't it? Because if we're giving privileges to the vaccinated, are we sometimes withholding them for those who aren't fully vaccinated through no choice of their own? I mean, that's a moral problem.
Yeah, it is. And I think, look, there are people who aren't vaccinated through no choice of their own for health reasons. So there's a very small, very, very small proportion of the population who are unable to get vaccinated because they've had, say, previous severe anaphylactic reactions to these or similar vaccinations. But for most of us, the nice thing is this isn't going to be a long-term thing. This is going to be a relatively short-term thing. And even when it's the case that some people get privileges that other people want, and it feels unfair, that's not necessarily a reason to remove the privileges from the people who are vaccinated. So people who are vaccinated did the right thing. Giving them privileges will encourage more people to be vaccinated. Everybody benefits from more people being vaccinated. So it might feel unfair, but it's tricky to say that because something is unfair, you don't want somebody else to have something that they were promised and, you know, have done the right thing to get, even though you might not be able to get it right now.
Dr. Cressida Gork-Roger is with us. So too is Tracy. You can join this conversation, 1300 222 702. Jump on the phone if you want to have your say, and better get in fast, I'd say, because there's quite a lot of people with a lot of opinions. Tracy, good morning.
Hi, how you going? My question is, I get a lot of people say, don't worry about the vaccination because look at Florida, they're anti-vax and they've got a lot, but we're getting vaccinated. But in fact, Florida in the States has a better double vaccination rate than us. And I've got a brother-in-law who has COVID and a lot of friends who have COVID, including ones in ICU and on dialysis. How do you tell people here that it's not a choice, that you have to get it for other people?
So you're saying that because people are so vulnerable that there really oughtn't be a choice around it. Sorry, just...
Yeah, like they're using crazy excuses like, oh, but we're more vaccinated. Florida's got a lot of COVID because they're not vaccinated. Well, their vaccination rates are higher than ours, but their death rates and their they've got 8,000 people a day or something going into hospital. So how do you make it real for people in New South Wales who think, well, that's just happening in America, it's not going to happen here?
Yeah. That's a really good point. It is hard sometimes for people to make the imaginative leap to, oh, that could happen here. And I don't understand. Look, thank you for that, Tracy. Good one. 1300 222 702. Thomas, good morning.
Good morning to you. Mr. Morrison and his crew, and the New South Wales government as well, every day come out, someone says, get vaccinated. Come on, young people, get up and get out and get vaccinated. My two grandkids, age 18 and 20, have been trying to get vaccinated for weeks and weeks on end. That they want to get the Pfizer, as advised by either lying or mistaking politicians. And they can't get it. I think October the 22nd, one boy was quoted, and that was 2 weeks ago he was quoted at.
Mm-hmm.
So why are they keep insisting telling young people to get out and do it if they can't? As I say, they're either telling lies or their people are not telling them things. And with politicians, once they get involved, I mean, their main interest is the next bloody election.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a big part of this debate, isn't it? The politics is ruling, I guess, some of the thinking in this. Look, thank you for that, Thomas. And it's a great point, I think, Cressida. I don't want to make this about me, but one of my sons has gone ahead and got a AstraZeneca, even though he's very, very young and entitled to a Pfizer, but there just isn't, and he's worried about the rest of the people in his life and wants to be vaccinated. So he's gone and done that. I have another friend who's in her mid-40s and she wants to take the Pfizer, and she can't get an appointment until the middle of October, the first one. So there's this assumption that if you're not vaccinated, it's really because it's your fault somehow. And then we're also seeing that in the reporting of the figures of people who end up in hospital. Oh, they're unvaccinated. So I feel a bit like we're turning. This is a sort of bifurcation. This point in our community, particularly today when these privileges have been awarded to those who are vaccinated to have these gatherings, and that's fine. But is there a danger that there is a sort of separation within the community?
Well, I mean, I think that there is, and one of the things that we're seeing is that with the higher rates of young people getting COVID and ending up in hospital, I mean, younger people are not only less likely to be vaccinated because the vaccination options have only opened to them relatively recently, but they're also more likely to be working in jobs that put them at a higher risk because they're frontline essential workers. And obviously there is a bit of a behavioural element, but I think that that's often the focus when we're thinking of blame. I think that blame's not really appropriate at the moment. There are areas where it might be appropriate, but as you say, it's often not people's fault that they're not vaccinated yet. And even those people who haven't chosen to make an appointment, we know that I think it's about 6% of the New South Wales population aren't anti-vaccination. They're just unsure. And, shouting at people, getting cross at people is not the way to convince people that this is actually safe and worthwhile. So part of it is about being supportive of other people and being empathetic and understanding those frustrations. And in terms of, what do you do when you've got friends who aren't vaccinated but it's not their choice? Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that you break the rules, but you try to be supportive. So you try to organise, a walk between, you and one of your friends, or Skype sessions or online trivia sessions to continue to support them and their mental health until they are actually able to join you as vaccinated people.
1300 222 702. We're talking with Dr. Cressida Gork-Roger, who is talking through the ethics of this. It's a very different time, I think, to where we were just a few weeks ago. Today, as we know, in Sydney, you can now have, in New South Wales, you can now have a picnic, and if you're allowed to have 5 people at a picnic, if they are all double vaccinated, and if there are children under 12 who aren't able to be vaccinated, they can be there as well. That was a change, the sort of little tweaking of the rules that came in over the weekend. And then if you're in an LGA of concern, you are able to do that for 2 hours. You're allowed to go and do that for 2 hours only with people from within your household. So those are the rules right now. So, if you are organising an event this weekend, a picnic in the park, 5 of you getting together, is it incumbent on you, the organiser, to ask the vaccination status of each friend beforehand? And then, would you check their official vaccination status to ensure, that they're telling you the truth? I don't think you'd do that, would you? Maybe you would. And, are you responsible for the health and safety of all the people who go there if you organise it? I mean, there's just sort of strange little questions arising out of this that I guess we never thought we'd be in. Let's talk to Kate, who's on the line. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning. How are you?
Well, thanks. Now, tell us about your friend.
I have a friend who was telling me about a friend of hers who has to have the vaccination for work, compulsory.
Hang on, Kate. Your phone's moving around a bit. Just try and keep still. We're getting a lot of crackling. Yeah.
Is that better? Yeah. A friend of mine, her friend has to have the vaccination for work, but it turns out her flatmate, in all these discussions, has turned into an anti-vaxxer. So she has told her if she gets it, she'll have to move out. So her choice is between her job and her homelessness.
So her flatmate has told her that if she gets the vaccination, she'll have to move out.
Yeah. Yes.
Gosh, I'd move out anyway if I had a flatmate. What do you think she should do?
It's so easy these days.
Yeah, right.
Personally, I would suggest that she didn't disclose that she had the vaccination if it was me.
That's amazing. Gosh, okay, so that's a great sort of example of the division that's going on within friendships and households.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kate. 1300 222 702. I think Michael has another one. Michael, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I have a very good friend who unfortunately let her passport expire and doesn't have a Medicare card yet and doesn't have a photo ID. And even though she desperately wants to get vaccinated, just the AstraZeneca, she went to 10 places in one day. And no one would give it to her because she doesn't have sufficient ID. And it's meant to be government policy that anyone in Australia can get it, no matter what their status. But she can't work, she's got no Medicare, she doesn't get Centrelink help. She's stuffed.
Oh, okay. Well, that sounds like quite a complex scenario, and I can see how it sort of creeps up on you. But, maybe there are solutions. Let's talk to Kate. Thanks for that, Michael. 1300 222 702. Now, Kate, another Kate, good morning to you.
Hi.
Hello.
So I'm ringing about the 12 to 15-year-old age group, which have only just had the vaccine extended to them. So they're being denied these privileges if they're not vaccinated, even though the vaccine's only just been approved for their age group by ATAGI. And over and above that, there are plenty of parents, myself included, who have concerns about vaccine safety, particularly for boys, because of their risk of myocarditis, which, according to a recent paper, exceeds the risk of hospitalization from COVID.
Hang on, Kate. So, I just have to establish your credentials here because, this is medical information that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular understanding of this?
So I'm a doctor. I'm not working at the moment, but I'm registered with the British Medical Council and the General Medical Council in Britain, and I'm a member of the Royal College of Paediatricians in the UK.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not working in Australia, but I'm well versed with it, and I think that I think it's extremely unfair to punish a younger cohort who face very low risks from COVID itself, but may face higher risks from vaccination, and obviously it particularly pertains to boys with myocarditis, because most children will have the infection either asymptomatically or mildly, and from an asymptomatic or mild infection will become immune. So they don't spread the disease in the same way that adults do, and their immunity is robust and durable. And I think that should be acknowledged. In fact, the Doherty Institute modelling was based on not vaccinating that age cohort because it wouldn't make any significant impact on the rate of hospitalisations because of the fact that they have mild disease. So if you're looking at it in terms of overloading the healthcare system, they're not going to overload the healthcare system. If you're looking at it in terms of community transmission, they're not going to transmit it the same way that adults do. There are plenty of papers from Britain showing that teenagers attending school are not drivers of spread. And in fact, school teachers, there's a very good paper in the British Medical Journal, school teachers in the UK who worked with unvaccinated school children faced a lower chance of acquiring COVID than the average adult in the community. I
just have to ask you, is this pre-Delta? Because we know that Delta has changed everything.
So and Delta is not more dangerous for children. There's good evidence to suggest that it's not more dangerous for children. I just have a very big problem with. Personally, I'm fully vaccinated. I absolutely believe that it's the right thing for adults to be vaccinated if they wish to be vaccinated. But to coerce and mandate it, I think, is unethical. Mm-hmm. I can't see how that wins people over to your argument. In fact, I think that it pushes people away and entrenches their. I think they might push people from being hesitant to actually truly identifying with an anti-vax ideology that will undermine public health, not only for this issue, but for other issues.
Yes. The long-term reputational damage of the immunisation programs here is.
And you like countries like Scandinavia, they achieved extremely high rates of vaccination through no coercion, no mandate, purely by trusting their community and communicating clearly and honestly and openly and encouraging people, but punishing. And I know that this is being framed as privileges, but really what it is punishment.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much for that, Kate. Yeah, look, Kate calling there, and quite a strong opinion about children and their rights, to be vaccinated or not. I am just going to read this text here. I am also a doctor. This is from Mark in Cheltenham. The risk of the vaccination is not higher than myocarditis in teenagers. I'm also a doctor registered in Australia. So we'll just take Elizabeth's opinion there as a personal one and not a medical one. So, we'll just leave that there. But let's go to Cressida Gork-Roger about the sort of ethics of the younger people in the community. And leaving aside the specifics there, I think I said earlier that children under 12 could go on these picnics. It's actually children under 16 can go on a picnic, Cressida, so I just wanted to clarify that. But this is another group that slips between the cracks.
Yeah, children, I think, is a much trickier case than adults. So adults have agency in a way that children typically don't. Adults can make decisions for themselves. Children under 16 need to make decisions kind of guided by their parents, or parents make decisions for them. And so they might get either the benefits or the problems that come with the decisions that other people are making on their behalves. And we also know that with children, there are harms that are done by not being able to attend school, particularly for vulnerable children. And so there are a number of policy issues at play in terms of weighing up the value of the kinds of protection that vaccination gives against the potential problems that you have by excluding children from certain things because they aren't vaccinated, particularly given that it's not necessarily the choice of those children. I think as you plan events with people, luckily, if the rule is that under 16 is the cutoff, then I don't think it's quite as severe or worrying. But, these are going to be decisions that you have to make. One of the things that you want to think about, though, if you don't agree with the rules, isn't just whether or not you don't agree with them because you think that it's safe to include certain people at, an event. But also, what's going to happen if you break the rules? So let's say that you have somebody who's not vaccinated or 17-year-old come to dinner with you at a restaurant. And maybe you lie to that restaurant about them being vaccinated. It's not just going to be you that faces the penalties if they're caught. It's also going to be that restaurant. So the restaurant might receive a large fine. They might even be closed down. And as hard as it might be to agree with the kinds of rules that are in place, you are making a choice on behalf of other people that's putting them at risk. And that doesn't feel like it's an appropriate choice for you to make in this case, even if you disagree with medical data.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I saw a restaurateur speaking on, I think it was late last week, saying, describing the kind of devastation this has wrought on his business and how desperate he is to restart. And he'd like to have the rule that you can't come in unless you're vaccinated, double vaccinated. He would like that. But he's also doesn't want to be in a situation where, as the concierge inviting people in, he has to ask or he has to do this. So I think there's a role there for laws that make it easier for him, because if somebody comes in and they have the disease and they pass it on to anyone in the place, but particularly to his staff, it's all back on. It's closed down again. So there's this protection of not just the health of those around us, but the financial stability of many small businesses.
And particularly, think about a special event. So I have a friend who had the terrible luck of having an engagement party where most of the guests caught gastro. Nothing to do with the food, nothing to do with the party. It was just clearly circulating, and one guest passed it on to other guests unknowingly. That, more than a decade later, that's the main thing we remember about that night, was the fact that everybody got gastro. Not all of the other wonderful things, and that's really unfortunate. But if you're having a family reunion or a wedding or a birthday party, you also want to think, well, while maybe you think that the risk of everyone getting COVID, or even some people getting COVID, is low, if you increase that risk by including people who aren't vaccinated, what a horrible memory it would be if that turns out to be an event where other people there catch COVID and are put at risk.
Yes. Yeah. Look, great points, because, you've got a long time to regret those kind of decisions, don't you, if any harm comes to somebody, even if you don't know them. So, this is the point. This is the point about this. Look, Cressida, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Dr. Cressida Gork-Roger, she is with a company called Where To Research. She's a senior public policy researcher there. She's a former departmental lecturer in ethics at Oxford University. A couple of people on the line with some really great opinions. Let's hear those in a moment, but we'll just get some news headlines because Tony Matthews is with us.
Hello, Cassie. The ABC can reveal the New South Wales government waited to announce Sydney's citywide lockdown until 2 days after health authorities realised they'd failed to contain a super spreader event in the city's southwest. Answers to questions on notice to a parliamentary inquiry reveal New South Wales Health knew on June the 24th it had failed to contain a COVID cluster linked to a birthday party at Hoxton Park. Authorities believed they'd isolated all guests, but discovered that day that several more attendees were still in the community. The government announced a lockdown only for Sydney's city and east on June the 25th, but waited till the following day to extend it to Greater Sydney because of the West Hoxton cluster. Queensland has recorded 2 new community cases of COVID-19, but the Queensland Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk, says the cases are low risk. The cases are students from St Thomas More College at Sunnybank and were in home quarantine. The New South Wales opposition says taxpayers will have to pay millions of dollars in compensation to 3 private consortiums over a cancelled tender for the proposed Western Harbour Tunnel. A spokesman for Transport for New South Wales says the decision not to proceed with the the development partner was more efficient and economical with no delays. And a pre-trial conference is set to begin in New York in a lawsuit brought against Prince Andrew, accusing him of sexual abuse. Virginia Giuffre alleges she was lent out for underage sex 2 decades ago and was abused by the Duke of York on multiple occasions. The 61-year-old Prince has repeatedly denied all the allegations and says he has no recollection of ever meeting her. Sydney's weather, mostly sunny at first with a high chance of showers developing this afternoon. A maximum of 19 degrees on the coast, Cassie, and 20 in the west.
Thank you very much for that, Tony. Yeah, a touch of rain for picnic day at the moment. Well, plenty more days ahead of us. Look, let's talk to Sean, who's on the line. We've been talking about some of the ethical dilemmas that come up and are likely to come up as we go ahead with re-emerging out of lockdown. Good morning, Sean. Sorry, Sean, I got you. I think I've got you now. Yeah, g'day, Sean. Good on you.
Yeah, as I can see it, there's 4 categories of people. There's vaxxed, anti-vaxxed, medically exempt, and choice. Now, the people who are in the choice category, psychological choice, are basically being very, very selfish. Their choices are impacting on me, my health, the health of the wider community, and they're doing so in a way that is very narrow-minded. So, as far as I'm concerned, if somebody has a medical exemption certified by a specialist, fine. But otherwise, if you are just a choice, psychological, religious, any other reason for not getting the vax, well, I'm sorry, you're not welcome in my house. And restaurants, I don't want someone in a restaurant who's in that situation dining at a table near me.
Yeah, look, thank you for that, Sean. Someone on our text line says, I don't want to work alongside unvaccinated people. Similar thought. Yeah, look, thank you for that. Let's talk to Andrew. Good morning.
Hi, Cassie. How you going?
Pretty good.
Hello, Cassie.
Yeah. So what do you think about? I mean, we heard Sean, really quite strong in his opinion there. Do you think similarly?
Yep, totally agree with Sean. I could talk about this for hours. If I agree. There is hardly anyone with a medical exemption that couldn't take one of the eligible vaccines. You've got an immunologist talking to James Valentine a couple of weeks ago that said there's about 1 person in a million in Australia that couldn't take one of the vaccines. So in New South Wales, there's probably 10, 12 people. So everyone should be out there getting a vaccine now if they can get one, whether it's AZ or whether it's Pfizer. And once we are open up, if you don't have a vaccine, you have the right not to have a vaccine and stay at home. Very simple.
Yeah. So you just feel that's that. It has to be that strong.
That's it.
Yeah.
Very straightforward. It's killing us financially.
Yeah.
It's killing us with mental health.
Yep.
We need to be out there now getting a vaccine. We're going to be raging through 80% in the next couple of days. We'll be through 90% first dose by the start of October.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find that by the end of October, we should be well into the 90s. And anyone who doesn't want to have a vaccine, they can just stay at home.
Are you willing to lose friends over it? Are you willing to be estranged from family members over this? Or
no, every single family member I know, every single person that I know that would be in my circle, in my family circle, is getting vaxxed or is already vaxxed.
Yep.
It's simple as that. And now that we're up into the 80s almost, there's not too many people
That's first.
aren't vaxxed yet. First dose, yeah. It's very straightforward. Just go and get a vaccine and get one as fast as you can. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you'll be staying home. And if you want to go out, fine. Just make the fines massive. It's a beautiful double-edged carrot and stick at the same time. Beautifully. You simply the carrot is if you're double vaxxed, you have freedom. But if you're not vaxxed, well then fine. You can stay at home and not be a virus vector for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Very simple.
Well, you're right, Andrew. You could talk about it all day, but you talk about it
for hours.
Very, very convincingly. No. Look, thank you.
Thanks, Cassie.
Thank you for that, Andrew. There. Look, I just want to clarify something for a caller who earlier said that they have a friend or a partner who doesn't have a Medicare card. The Australian Government Health website states that if you don't have a Medicare card or you're not eligible for Medicare, you can get your free vaccination at a Commonwealth vaccination clinic or at a state or territory vaccination clinic, or any of the community pharmacies that are administering COVID-19 vaccines. This includes people who may be homeless or for whatever circumstance do not have a Medicare card, and that could be people who may be have overstayed a visa. I think you just can be rest assured that people want you vaccinated and they're not going to ask too many questions about it. I don't know how then you have proof of that vaccination. That's another question, but not having a Medicare card will not exclude you from having a vaccine. Look, I'm just going to read you. There are seriously dozens and dozens and dozens of messages on this, and they are all very strongly worded. I'll just read you a couple of the less perhaps strident. My dilemma is Christmas Day, says Ruth. I have one adult child who is not in favour of vaccinations. Everyone else in the family is, and I just don't know how to ask if he has changed his mind in the last 2 to 3 months after he has seen the effects of this outbreak. Here's another one. What about church? This is from Jilly. She said, has everyone there been vaccinated? How do you ask everyone? What if you're medically compromised? Joe says, my son, who's 14, and 11 of his friends all got their first Pfizer vaccination this morning. They're aged from 12 to 15, and they were all very proud to be vaxxed, looking forward to their next one in 3 weeks' time. Normally, says Denise, I would be against the government enforcing these sort of rules. However, a pandemic is not a normal situation. For me, this is a very important point. This has devastated too many lives. Yeah, huge issues that we are grappling with here, and I think the opinion is really strongly one way on this. Okay, in a moment, we're going to meet a brand new Supreme Court judge. He's the first Australian of Indian descent to serve on the New South Wales Supreme Court bench.
What if our kids had the tools to end racism?
Some kids started insulting me. It overwhelmed me.
This school is taking part in a groundbreaking pilot program.
If you have blue or green eyes, take 3 steps forward.
This is not fair.
To find out if kids can show us the way.
Join Mark Fennell for the school that tried to end racism.
I wish I had been in a class like this.
So cool.
Start September 21 on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
This is Focus
With Cassie McCullough
on ABC Radio Sydney.
Well, last week, a new judge was appointed to the New South Wales Supreme Court. Sydney barrister Hemant Jani will take up the new role next week, and when he does, he'll become the first Australian of Indian descent to serve on the New South Wales Supreme Court bench. Let's meet him and find out a little more about the role and how he sees it. Hemant, hello and congratulations.
Thank you, Cassie. I should say it's actually Danji.
Danji.
But,
oh, okay. I'm
yes.
apologising. Thank you very much for that. I really want to get these names right.
That's quite all right. It's happened to me throughout my career.
I'm sure it has. Now, when you start this job, actually, besides getting your name right, what will be the correct way to address you? Are you going to be, in the courtroom, that is, will you be Your Honour?
In the courtroom, I'll be Your Honour.
All right. Okay. Does that change for any other judges?
Sorry, does it change for
any judge in any
court hierarchy? No, it's actually Your Honour across all hierarchies, from the local court, the district court, and the Supreme Court. Many years ago, when I started, it was in the local court. It was Your Worship, but the legal system moves quickly to bring things to get rid of arcane things like Your Worship, and they changed it to Your Honour.
Yeah, I don't know. I still wouldn't mind being called that around the house, but that's another matter.
I think Your Honour's still fairly arcane, but things move slow.
No, there is an important... I mean, I've heard people talk about this before, that the role of a judge and all the wigs and the gowns and the way the courtroom is designed, you do need to see a judge as not really just an individual, you do sometimes need to see them as an officiator of the state. Do you think that's fair, or do you think it's better to have a more human version of a judge?
No, I think it's fair to say that it's important to see that it's a person performing a particular role, and it's a very important role, and it's one that comes with an enormous tradition. And that tradition is something that we, of a country, have inherited. And obviously, the legal system that we have here is a sort of fundamental part of what makes us the country we are.
Yes, and the rule of law. Without it, who knows what would happen. So the Supreme Court. This is where you're going to be working. It's in Queen's Square, which is it's just on Macquarie Street, near King and Phillip. It's on the opposite side to Parliament, State Parliament, and it's sort of more towards Hyde Park. So I'm trying to get a picture for people so they can, see where it is.
Yeah, so if you come out of St James Station and up those stairs, you can come up into Queen's Square and you'll have the Supreme Court in front of you. Mm-hmm. You'll have Hyde Park at your back. You'll have Parliament House on your right-hand side, and you'll have, Elizabeth Street in the city on your left.
So can you explain, for someone like myself who is a bit of, a bit ignorant, I guess, of the legal system and the way it works in details, what does the Supreme Court do? What kind of cases end up there?
So the Supreme Court, as the name suggests, sits at the top of the hierarchy of courts in New South Wales. So it deals with the most serious cases, both civil and criminal cases. So in the criminal sphere, which is my background and where I've got all my experience, although I will be required to do both criminal and civil matters, but to take crime as the sort of first example, the Supreme Court will deal with murder cases, but it will also deal with serious or particularly complicated white-collar matters, and it will deal with matters that have a particular public importance to them. So people might be aware that very recently there's been trials in the McDonald and Obeid matters. Another good example that people might remember is about 10 years ago, there was a very senior law enforcement officer who was, at the time, of the alleged offence, which was subsequently proved, the Assistant Commissioner of the New South Wales Crime Commission. So you have in those cases a particular public interest in seeing the matter brought to trial in a fair and proper way. And that's not to say that all criminal matters aren't of public importance. Of course they are, and of course the courts across all levels do a terrific job. But the most serious cases are reserved for the Supreme Court.
Yeah, with some very meaty and complex issues at the heart of them sometimes, I imagine.
And the other thing I suppose I should say is that it also has a real importance in terms of its supervisory role, because it does sitting at the top of that court hierarchy. It has a supervisory role over the other courts, so the local court, district court, sitting underneath, and children's court as well. And so in that role, it's ensuring that the lower courts are properly applying the process that they're required to apply. So not necessarily going back and saying, well, would we do this differently, but rather just going back and saying, well, was this process the process that was required? And if not, then intervening.
Now, look, this sounds like a long way from Meadowbank Boys High School, Hammond, and someone on our text line is saying, your guest, the Supreme Court judge, sounds pretty young. Can you ask him how old he is? I'm not sure if you're willing to...
I don't feel that young, but I'm 57.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, tell us about, growing up, because you're a Sydney local. You went to Meadowbank Boys High, which sadly doesn't exist anymore. I think it got folded into a TAFE. But what was that like back then?
It sat next to the Meadowbank TAFE, which swallowed it up.
So what was it like being, I mean, you know, in Meadowbank Boys High, you know, what, in the 70s, 80s, and, you know, being also part of Sydney's Gujarati community, which is the Indian part of the community that you belong to?
Yeah, it's interesting looking back. I actually didn't start at Meadowbank. I was accepted into James Roost, and I actually started there. And it's interesting to reflect because I attended for the first few weeks of Year 7 at James Roost, decided that the travel was a bit far from where I was living, and made the decision to change to the local school, which was Meadowbank. And it didn't seem such an extraordinary thing to do at the time. But when I look at that now, it does make me reflect on how competitive it's become for children to get into schools like James Roost. And it does make me reflect on the level of pressure.
Selective public school, yeah.
That's right. And so when I look back, I'm able to say that I was able to change to a school like Meadowbank, and it didn't have with it the sense, I mean, Meadowbank was not noted for its academic achievement. I mean, there were some very smart people that went through there and some people who have done very well, but it certainly wasn't noted for its academic achievement. And so that aspect of changing schools to a school like that, I think to an extent reflected the times, which was that there wasn't this sort of, well, certainly I didn't feel this great pressure to get into a stream where I would start achieving at an early age, because if I didn't, avenues would close to me.
Yeah. Look, this is called the big fish, little pond effect by psychologists, educational psychologists. They say that if you're left in a little pool where you're the big fish, you'll do better than if you're in, a big pond when there's lots of really smart fish around you. Then your academic outcome will often not reflect your ability, because you've been, your self-concept has been challenged by those around you. So perhaps you're a classic example of that. So
that might be right, although it should also be said I didn't actually do particularly well at school. So but what I did have was definitely some good teachers that certainly made it clear to me that I had ability. And I also had parental expectations, which is that other aspect. As you say, I'm of Indian background. My parents are Gujarati. And as the classic, situation with a child of migrant parents, there was an expectation on me to at least, there was a value placed on education and an expectation placed on me that I would at least go to university.
Yeah. We're talking here with Hemant Danji. He is about to become New South Wales's first Supreme Court judge of Indian descent. Now, you worked in criminal law, as you've mentioned already, and you've worked on some big cases. If people look you up, they can see which ones. Some of the ones that have taken the headlines. But why criminal law, and what drives you about that?
Criminal law has always been, for me, I think, the most interesting aspect of the law. It deals, fundamentally, it deals with the human condition. In terms of what really kind of directed me there was one thing that was very clear to me, and that is that if I was in a room poring over lengthy contracts or commercial documents, I would not do very well and I would not be very happy. So I finished university. I applied for a number of jobs, but my definite interest was to go somewhere like the Legal Aid Commission or to a community legal centre, because I did have at that stage a strong sense that I wanted to do something where I was dealing with people in a way that more directly rather than through complex contracts or documents, and to a large extent to deal with people who came from socioeconomically deprived backgrounds, so that I think I had a sense of providing for those people a voice, so that they could at least, irrespective of what they'd done, at least be heard and understood and achieve as what best one could a just outcome.
Yes, well, this is always what they say. The justice you get is well, I mean, cynics say this, I don't say it, but you hear people say that your justice is what you can pay for, and I think probably sadly that is true. Look, we have such a short amount of time, and I could ask you about the Indigenous incarceration rates and how we can turn that around, and also about the adversarial system and how victims experience that, particularly people in sexual assault cases having to withstand some pretty heavy duty questioning sometimes. But in the minute we've got left, what about the funding of the system? Are poor people able to access justice? Is that an issue that you see?
It's an ongoing issue, and I think that there are some terrific lawyers in places like the Legal Aid Commission, and certainly, as I said, I spent my first 7 years of my career there. But you do work under enormous pressures in terms of time, which obviously is a result of funding issues. There's obviously a lot of competing factors, but obviously, in terms of the health of a justice system, if you have a large number of people before that system, and in relation to those people there's a lack of adequate funding, you're going to affect the health of that justice system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's only as strong as the weakest link, I guess, is what you're saying there. Well, congratulations, as I say, and you start next week. We'll be looking for your name in the papers.
Hopefully nothing too controversial.
Yeah, that's right. In the right way. Look, well done. Thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Hemant Danji, he's joining the New South Wales Supreme Court bench next week. Been a barrister in some big cases, and now, will be sitting in judgment. And, the first Australian of Indian descent to serve in that role, and from Sydney's Gujarati community, growing up there, and went to Meadowbank Boys High. Now, would you believe that I think we are having a COVID update from the New South Wales government after the news? I wouldn't think that was going to be the case until about an hour ago, but we will, and we will take you straight to that. But you mustn't miss Conversations. John Safran, the documentary maker, bad boy author, will be talking to Richard Feidler about, something, his new mission, I think, and that's raising awareness around the vapes, really. The way that people are taking up vaping is the subject of his new book, and I'm sure he's done a lot of investigation. I'll be very keen to hear what he's dug up and how that is shifting people to being smokers around the world, even if that's not what the tobacco companies want you to hear. Okay, see you after the news. It's 11 o'clock. Good morning. Tony Matthews with ABC News. The ABC can reveal the New South Wales government waited to announce Sydney's citywide lockdown until 2 days after health authorities realised they'd failed to contain a super spreader event in the city's southwest. Sean Rubenstein-Dunlop from ABC Investigations has more.
Answers to questions on notice to a parliamentary inquiry reveal New South Wales Health knew it had failed to contain a COVID cluster linked to a birthday party at Hoxton Park 2 days before the Sydney-wide lockdown was announced in June. Authorities believed they'd isolated all the party's guests, but discovered that day that several more were still in the community. The state government initially only locked down Sydney's city and east. The revelations are at odds with comments from Chief Health Officer Kerry Chant, who said it was unknown that day that the cluster wasn't contained. She said it triggered the citywide lockdown.
Parents with children aged 12 years and over are being encouraged to book them in for a COVID-19 vaccine. Children between the ages of 12 and 15 are now eligible to get the Pfizer vaccine. From next week, pharmacies will also start receiving the Moderna vaccine, which has also been approved for children in that age group. The head of the government's vaccine task force, Lieutenant General John Fruin, says vaccine supplies are increasing.
People obviously need to get online, make the bookings. I do ask for just a little bit of patience as we get them settled in over the next couple of weeks, but people should be able to get on and get bookings within a couple of weeks.
3 removalists who travelled to the state's central west while one of them was infectious with COVID have pleaded guilty to breaking the public health orders. The men in their 20s travelled to Molong near Orange in July, despite being told by New South Wales Health of the positive diagnosis while on their journey. They were accused of continuing to travel despite being aware of their infection status. Their solicitor entered the guilty pleas in the Orange local court this morning on their behalf, and they'll return to the same court for sentencing in November. A state parliamentary hearing has heard Aboriginal community leaders in Wilcannia in outback New South Wales started calling for measures to reduce overcrowding in the town 12 months ago. The Public Accountability Committee is hearing from community leaders and local elders in Western New South Wales about the COVID response in their towns. Motorhomes have arrived in Wilcannia to help people isolate, but local elder Monica Kerwin says her community needed measures sooner to address overcrowding.
If we would have put a foolproof plan in 12 months ago, we wouldn't have the high numbers that we do have in our community right now. I feel heartbroken, angry, just like the community, to a slow response.
Queensland has recorded 2 new local COVID cases linked to a family cluster on Brisbane's south side. Both are students who'd been in home quarantine after a Sunnybank High School was closed on Friday. Britain is set to begin the world's biggest trial of a blood test that can be used to detect more than 50 types of cancer before symptoms appear. The Gallery test looks at the DNA in a patient's blood to determine if they come from cancer cells. Earlier diagnosis of cancer leads to dramatically increased survival rates. 2 Australians have won trophies on the final day of the US Tennis Open at Flushing Meadows. Jack Snape reports.
Novak Djokovic has failed in his bid to become the first man since Rod Laver in 1969 to win 4 men's singles Grand Slam titles in the same year, losing the final to Daniil Medvedev in straight sets. It leaves a 34-year-old tied with Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal on 20 Grand Slam wins. But Medvedev has told ESPN he believes Djokovic is the best.
I never said this to anybody, but I'll say it right now. For me, you are the greatest tennis player in the history.
Earlier, Australian Dylan Alcott secured the men's quad singles Golden Slam, having won all 4 slams and Olympic gold this year. And 37-year-old Sam Stosur won the women's doubles with her Chinese partner, Shuai Zhang.
And in News Just In, New South Wales has recorded 1,257 new cases of locally acquired coronavirus and another 7 deaths. Looking at the weather for New South Wales, showers with possible hail and the chance of a thunderstorm in the southeast, a shower or 2 elsewhere along the coast and adjacent ranges and southeastern inland. Snow on the Alps with a dusting on the central tablelands. Sydney's weather, mostly sunny at first with the high chance of showers developing this afternoon, a maximum of 19 degrees on the coast and 20 expected in the west. Showers forecast tomorrow and a top of 18. Right now, 16 on the coast, 17 in the west. ABC News.
Hello, I'm Cassie McCullough, and on ABC Radio across New South Wales, we're about to go to the COVID update with the Premier in a moment, but I just want to let you know that conversations with Richard Fidler today, his guest is John Safran, the author and documentary maker, and he'll be explaining the radical new future for the tobacco giant Philip Morris, not one to be missed. But here's the Premier.
Good morning, everybody. Fortunately for New South Wales, our vaccination rates keep increasing. However, there has been a slight slowdown, so we encourage everybody to come forward and get vaccinated. We have 46.2% double-dosed adults in New South Wales, or 16 and over, which is great, and 78.5% who have received their first dose. And obviously it's when that 46.2% number gets to 70% double dose that we can look forward to those freedoms that we announced recently in our roadmap. To 8 p.m. last night, there were 1,257 cases of community transmission and regrettably 7 deaths, and we extend our deepest and heartfelt condolences to the family and loved ones of all those who died overnight. Can I stress a number of key points today? Firstly, southwestern Sydney and western Sydney remain our areas of concern in Greater Sydney area. However, we are seeing a stabilisation in some local government areas of concern, and that's positive. We hope that continues. However, we have seen also an increase in cases, as we mentioned yesterday and the day before, in the inner Sydney areas of Glebe and Redfern, and we ask communities in those areas to please come forward and get vaccinated, but also to make sure they're sticking to the COVID restrictions. And again, in regional New South Wales, we have seen a stabilisation in cases. However, in Hunter, the Central Coast, and Wollongong, we've seen an increase in cases. And Dr McAnulty will also talk about sewage detection in some communities where there isn't currently any cases. And we ask those communities to come forward and get tested and to make sure they get vaccinated. But I want to leave a really key message today, and that is do not let your guard down. Today there has been some easing of restrictions after we passed that 6 million jab number, but it's way too early for any of us to get complacent, and we are concerned that an unexpected event, a super spreader event, can suddenly have a major setback. And so whilst people start enjoying some things they couldn't enjoy last week, I urge the community, please do not get complacent. Do not let your guard down, because any event that we don't anticipate or expect could see a major setback, and none of us want to see that happen. I also want to make this very important point, that obviously once we get to 70% double dose vaccination, we've outlined the freedoms that exist for vaccinated people. However, don't assume that at 80% double dose vaccination, that unvaccinated people are going to have all those freedoms. I want to make that point very clear. The government is yet to finalise its plans in relation to what happens at 80% double dose. And our key message is come forward and get vaccinated, because once we start opening up at 70% double dose vaccination, the higher the rate of adult coverage of people 16 and over that are vaccinated, the better it is for all of us. Now, currently that figure is at 78.5%. By the time we start opening up, we would like to see that figure at 85% or even closer to 90%. Now, that is our hope, because that gives that extra level of protection, because there is no doubt that once we start reopening, those that are unvaccinated are especially vulnerable. So I'm appealing to all of you, to everybody, to make sure in your circle of friends or family, if you know of anybody that's unvaccinated, please make sure they come forward and get vaccinated. Importantly, for those aged 16 years and over, Pfizer is now available, as we know. Young adult or 16 to 18-year-olds can only accept Pfizer. Pfizer is now available from GPs across the state, which is positive news. And in fact, we want to encourage all those Year 12 students and Year 11 students who are eligible to come forward and get vaccinated, to give that extra bit of protection for older adolescents and younger adults. But we also want to make sure that everybody is clear that from today and next week, for 12 to 15-year-olds, Pfizer is available at GPs, and from next week, Moderna will be available at pharmacists for young children aged between 12 and 15. So we really want parents to take up this opportunity to vaccinate their children, so that by the time we go back to school, not only will we have high vaccination coverage for adults, but we'll also start to see some vaccination coverage for 12 to 15-year-olds as an additional safeguard. So these are additional safeguards that we want our community to have by the time we start reopening. But I want to stress again, for those of you who choose not to be vaccinated, that's your choice, but don't expect to do everything that vaccinated people do, even when we hit 80%. And I want to make that very clear. Our strong message today from the public health team, from myself and the New South Wales government, is come forward and get vaccinated, because all of us fear what will happen to those around us who aren't vaccinated, but also please think about our hospital staff and those that have to take care of people with COVID. We want to protect them as much as we protect each other and our loved ones. And the hospital system will come under increasing stress once we start opening up if there are too many people that are unvaccinated. And again, on that point, I want to stress that as our state moves towards those higher vaccination rates, as we see some communities in Western Sydney, for example, get vaccination rates to around first dose 89-90%, which is outstanding, that means that there are pockets of our community which are well below the state average. And today I want to welcome Danielle Austin, who's at St Vincent's Hospital. She's one of the wonderful registered nurses there, and she's in charge of managing the vaccination program for that hospital, but also in managing the mobile vaccination van that goes out to support vulnerable people in our community to ensure that we have outreach programs as well as just in-reach programs to cover off anyone vulnerable in the community. And finally, I just want to again say to everybody that as we approach those targets, all of us can be hopeful. But our reopening is based on the premise that all of us are responsible, safe and cautious during this time. All of us are looking forward to doing those things we can't currently do, but all of us will move together safely and cautiously, respecting the health orders and appreciating that whilst ever people remain unvaccinated, they remain more vulnerable and more susceptible to the ravages of this very serious illness. I'll ask Dr McAnulty now to give his update. Then Danielle Austin will explain to us the important outreach program for vulnerable communities as an example of how we need everybody to catch up to the state average to make sure there aren't pockets of unvaccinated people who are vulnerable. And then we'll take your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Premier, and good morning, everyone. Just wanted to take you through the numbers from for yesterday. There are a total of 1,257 locally acquired cases of COVID reported to 8 o'clock last night, and there are 3 overseas acquired cases reported in the same period. There were 137,668 COVID tests reported yesterday, compared to 105,505 the day before. We have currently 1,189 people in hospital admitted with COVID. 222 people are in intensive care, 94 of whom require ventilation. Sadly, as the Premier mentioned, we've seen the deaths of 7 people yesterday. A man in his 90s from Dubbo who died at St Mary's Villa aged care facility, where he acquired the infection, who was vaccinated and had underlying health conditions. A man in his 80s from Sydney's inner city died at St Vincent's Hospital. He was not vaccinated and had underlying health conditions. A woman in her 60s from southwestern Sydney died at Camperdown Hospital. She was not vaccinated. A man in his 80s died at Nepean Hospital. He acquired his infection at the Hawkesbury Living Aged Care Facility in Sydney's northwest. And it's the second death, sadly, linked to this outbreak at this facility. He was vaccinated and had significant underlying health conditions. A man in his 90s from southwestern Sydney who died at Liverpool Hospital. He was vaccinated and had underlying health conditions. A woman in her 90s from South Sydney's inner west who died at Concord Hospital. Was not vaccinated and had underlying health conditions. And a man in his 80s from southwestern Sydney who died at Sutherland Hospital, who was vaccinated and had multiple underlying health conditions. We'd really like to express our deepest sympathies to the families and friends of these people who sadly died. There have now been 184 COVID-19 related deaths in New South Wales since the 16th of June 2021 and 240 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. We've had a number of sewage detections identified in recent days in places where we have no known cases, so we're really urging people in these areas to come forward for testing if you have even the mildest of symptoms. And these are at Yass and Eden in the southern part of New South Wales, in Tamworth in the heart of New England, in Dunbogan and Karua on the mid-north coast, in Jiroa at Illawarra Shoalhaven, and Brooklyn in northern Sydney. So please, if you live in those communities or have been in those communities, come forward for testing right away with even the mildest of symptoms. Where the suburbs we're seeing most cases in at the moment continue to be in Sydney's west and southwest, notably Greenacre, Auburn, Yagoona, Liverpool, Punchbowl, Guildford, but also Redfern, Bankstown, Condell Park and Busby. So we're seeing increasing cases in the inner city Redfern, Waterloo and so on. So we're really urging people who are living in these suburbs as well as everywhere else, but particularly if you're in one of these suburbs with high levels of cases, please make sure that you're coming forward for vaccination, and make sure your family and friends are as well. Vaccination is our key to getting out of this. In Western New South Wales, we've had 12 cases of COVID reported yesterday, bringing the total number in the LHD, the local health district, to 978. Yesterday's numbers included 5 in Bathurst, 4 in Dubbo, 2 in Bourke and 1 in Walgett. There's an outbreak going on in Walgett, and we're concerned that people who have been in Walgett or live in nearby communities where there might have been contacts travelling to and from Walgett to be particularly vigilant and come forward for testing, particularly if you're concerned about Coonamble, and we've seen a call out for people to get tested in Coonamble just in case they've been exposed to the virus. Please come forward for testing if you live in those areas. In the far west, we've had 7 cases reported yesterday, with 4 in Broken Hill and 3 in Wilcannia. As the Premier mentioned, we've seen an upswing in cases in the Illawarra, Shoalhaven area, as well as in the Central Coast and Hunter areas over the weekend. So we're very concerned that people really need to hear those messages about getting tested, being alert for symptoms, maintain the COVID safe practices, and importantly, get a vaccine if you haven't already got one. Thanks very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Premier. So since February of this year, we've administered well over 8 million COVID vaccinations in New South Wales, and another milestone was achieved this morning. We opened our doors to children aged 12 years and over at our hub, and I can tell you it was a delightful thing to see those children in our queue at the hub this morning. As part of the statewide vaccination program, St Vincent's Hospital vaccination team has been working tirelessly over these months to ensure equitable access to vaccinations for vulnerable populations across our broader community. Last year, our homeless health, mental health and alcohol and drug, disability and aged care services identified the exceptional risk these population groups faced under the threat of COVID. And we saw firsthand the devastating impact on residents and their families when COVID took hold in facilities. We knew that providing vaccinations was the only way to ensure the ongoing safety of our patients who bear additional risks with COVID. Nearly 5 months ago, and I'm so proud of this, we opened our first targeted homeless health and social housing hub down in Woolloomooloo in partnership with St Vincent de Paul, Kirkton Road Centre, the City of Sydney and specialist homeless health services from across the local area. And since then, we've provided more than 5,000 vaccinations to those who are most vulnerable in our community. And I have to say it's one of the greatest achievements I think I can stand here and talk about from a personal perspective. Our Vinnie's Vax Van was an idea born from a conversation held at this hub. When vaccine hesitancy was at its peak across the broader community, this hub saw people turning up in their hundreds week in and week out because they knew that vaccination was the only way to keep themselves, their loved ones and their community safe. And so we knew that there was appetite out there for people to receive COVID vaccinations. But we knew that not everybody was going to be able to access vaccinations through our standard mass vaccination hubs and other clinics. And whether that was reasons of cultural and linguistic difference, whether that was due to poor mobility, physical disability, chronic health conditions, or people who aren't able to leave their houses, we knew that we needed to reach them instead. I was very fortunate to be able to reach out to the Curran Foundation and the Suttons family, who very quickly supported the idea, understood the importance of this work and provided us with our first Vax van, which has now been extended to 2 Vax vans. We've travelled across Greater Sydney, vaccinating residents and staff in residential aged care facilities, young people with severe disabilities and supported accommodation and their carers, people who are bedbound and unable to leave their homes, along with their families who have lived with the fear of passing COVID on to their vulnerable loved ones. We've provided vaccinations through hubs and from our Vax van for people living in temporary accommodation and hostels, those people who have been further isolated throughout this pandemic. And we've been able to respond to areas of concern at short notice, including deploying teams into Parkley Prison to administer vaccinations to inmates and staff there. Are we unique? Not at all. I stand here representing the thousands of people who are out there in our vaccination programs across the state who are doing everything they can to rapidly protect our broader community. Why? Because we know that vaccination is the only way out of this. It is the light at the end of the tunnel. And especially for my colleagues who are on the floor day and night at the moment dealing with the ravages of COVID as it affects more and more people across our community, we are working relentlessly at the other end of the spectrum trying to protect those who are in our community, but also to protect our colleagues who are working on the front lines. And there are thousands of us working across the vaccination program, and I wanted to give a quick shout out to them because it's not just the doctors and nurses, it's the pharmacists, it's the techs, it's the IT support, it's the cleaners, it's the wayfinders, it's security. There are literally thousands of your New South Wales compatriots out there working hard to keep the community safe. And this vaccination program is so immensely complex and relies on so many moving parts, all of them people. And all of them people who want that light at the end of the tunnel to get closer and brighter every single day. So for everyone out there watching who hasn't been vaccinated, I cannot ask you strongly enough to please reach out to your primary healthcare provider and have discussions if you have concerns about vaccination. Reach out to your local health centres. Reach out through New South Wales Health website, the New South Wales Government website, Health Direct, to make your vaccination appointment. Come down and see us at our pop-up clinics, our outreach clinics, all of which can be found on the New South Wales Health website. If you are having difficulty accessing a COVID vaccination for yourself or for somebody you love, please contact Health Direct so we can find you out there in the community and provide you with the protection that you deserve. And to our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, my health colleagues and I understand the absolute urgency with which we need to provide you with that protection. So this week, and as part of our ongoing commitment to protecting all of our communities, we are holding specific pop-up clinics across the state for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people aged 12 years and over. For everyone else, my final comment is please get vaccinated, please be part of the solution, and please help end this pandemic as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Danielle Austin, Incident Response and Disaster Manager at St Vincent's Hospital, speaking about the vaccination outreach program for homeless and vulnerable people. 5,000 vaccinations have been administered to date through that program. Just to recap, the Premier told us there have been 1,257 new cases, 7 deaths. There are 1,189 people in hospital, 222 in intensive care units, and 94 require ventilation. There has been a slight slowdown in the vaccination rate. 46.2% of New South Wales adults are now fully vaccinated. 78.5% have received one dose. Pfizer vaccines are now available for 12 to 15-year-olds at GPs, and the Moderna vaccine will be available from next week for 12 to 15-year-olds. The Premier also said that the government's plan at over 80% double dose has not been finalised, but do not assume the freedoms will extend to the unvaccinated. That's a quote from the Premier. Areas of concern in Sydney, Glebe and Redfern. And in the regions, there's been a general stabilisation of cases in the regions, but there has been an increase in the Hunter, the Central Coast and the Illawarra Shoalhaven region, and there's also been virus fragments detected in sewage plants around the state. Let me just read you those. Yass and Eden treatment plants in southern New South Wales, at the Giroa treatment plant in the Illawarra Shoalhaven, the Brooklyn treatment plant in northern Sydney, also Dunbogan and Karua treatment plants on the mid-north coast, and Tamworth in the Hunter, New England region. So no cases have been identified with these locations, so everyone who is near them is urged to monitor for the onset of symptoms, and if they appear, to immediately be tested and isolate until a negative result is received. Okay, let's get to these conversations with Richard Feidler, who's talking to John Safran, author, documentary maker, who's explaining the radical new future for the tobacco giant Philip Morris. Now, 3 years ago, Philip Morris announced they were moving away from cigarettes with a campaign to, quote, unsmoke the world. They offered smokers what they said was a better alternative to the cigarette, a new device to give you a nicotine fix from a heat stick. But as John discovered, the heat stick is primarily made from tobacco and still generates carcinogenic tar. And Philip Morris have been financing a whole bunch of anti-smoking, and quote marks there too, initiatives around the world designed to shift people onto this new device. Here he is explaining how we've allowed this to happen.
Tell me in some of the ways in which Philip Morris partners itself with some progressive movements that you've noticed.
Gee, they're just so brilliant. They would draw the line nowhere. So, for instance, they fully fund an organisation called the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World.
The Foundation for a Smoke-Free World?
Yes. Imagine if you're just an ordinary person, you see there's this Foundation for a Smoke-Free World. You're like, oh, they must be against cigarette companies and big tobacco. And it's like, yeah, 100% funded by Philip Morris. And through that foundation, they fully fund an Indigenous health organisation in New Zealand. And it's run by this Maori woman. And she presents the argument for Philip Morris in very woke ways. Like, so not even like conventional left ways. So, for instance, it becomes, who are white people to tell Indigenous people what to do? There should be Indigenous self-determination. Therefore, when you have like New Zealand anti-smoking campaigns trying to tell Maori people to stop smoking because they're highly overrepresented compared to other New Zealanders in smoking, that's like white colonisers trying to tell Indigenous people what to do. That's like white outsiders coming in and being colonisers. And just to be perfectly clear, there is no shortage of Maori organisations and Maori people who are like, what is this? That's a very specific thing that this one Philip Morris backed group does.
A friend in the UK sent you a pic from the London Underground, a billboard on quitting smoking that had the headline, Never Look Back. Tell me a bit about that and its involvement with Vice, the sort of edgy media organisation.
Yeah, well, in today's world, you can't look at an anti-smoking campaign and assume it's all face value, because Philip Morris have built what I call in the book this kind of shadow land. They've created anti-smoking campaigns that at first blush just seem like what you'd get from like Quit Victoria or the World Health Organization or the Heart Foundation or things like that. But they're actually anti-smoking ads reverse engineered by Philip Morris to achieve the aims that they want to achieve.
And what are those aims now? The aim is just to shift people essentially from cigarettes to the new IQOS and the heat stick.
Yes, but at the moment, if you talk to a mainstream anti-smoking group, they'll say, yeah, we're trying to stop the tobacco trade. Whilst Philip Morris are being very clever, they're saying, no, we don't have to stop the tobacco trade. We've got to stop the smoking business. And then they claim that their new device doesn't generate smoke, so it's not the problem. So they've started creating these anti-smoking campaigns that just look totally mainstream and normal, but they're very tricky because where the World Health Organization would say, stop inhaling tobacco, Philip Morris just say, oh, no, stop inhaling smoke, and then they claim this new thing isn't smoke. Yeah, so in the London Underground, that was the Vice anti-smoking campaign. Then you go to the website and it's like, yeah, you should stop cigarettes altogether, but if you can't do that, why not sort of do something a bit in between, maybe try out e-cigarettes, and obviously like Quit Victoria or the World Health Organization wouldn't be saying that.
Why aren't they just in the vape business? Because, I've heard stories of those US congressional inquiries into big tobacco where they found correspondence between officials in the big tobacco companies where they admit that we're in the nicotine delivery business. That's what they call themselves, the nicotine delivery business. It's not so much about, the tar is just the thing that gives you cancer, and that's the unfortunate byproduct of getting people addicted to this very addictive substance, which is nicotine. Why aren't they putting all their money on vaping, producing nicotine for vapes? It'd be an easier thing to sell, wouldn't it?
Well, I think a couple of things. So one thing is they want a point of distinction, so they can go to shareholders and say, well, this is why you should keep on investing in our company, because we have this USP, this unique selling point. We've got this thing that's different, that's our own, that only we can do. And that's this proprietorial heat stick. We've got the future worked out. It's pretty easy to make vape juice, like anyone to do it in their garage. So it's like this business that anyone could get into, whilst they're heat sticks. Like you can't be making that in your own garage or whatever. So they've got a product. It's going to be quite difficult for other people to counterfeit. And then I think they've just got everything in place. They've got their tobacco farms, everything's sort of like in place for them to remain in the tobacco business. They are kind of lightly getting involved in vaping, but they're into supporting vaping in so much that it will soften the path for them to allow the IQOS. But I don't think it's their main game. And I don't think it's definitely not what the shareholders want to hear now, because vaping's got all this bad press because of young people were ending up in hospital and dying. They made a big point of the IQOS and the heat stick is not a vape, and offering it as an option for people who are apprehensive about vaping.
This is Conversations with Richard Fidler.
I'm with author and documentary maker John Safran. John's written a book called Puff Peace, How Philip Morris Set Vaping Alight and Burned Down the English Language. After the headlines, John allows himself to be wined and dined by figures from Philip Morris and offered an entry into the Cube in Switzerland. On ABC Radio, it's 28 minutes to midday.
Hello, Tony Matthews with the latest from the newsroom. New South Wales has recorded 1,257 new local cases of coronavirus and 7 more deaths. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says unvaccinated people may not regain freedoms even if the state reaches 80% double-dose vaccinations. 46.2% of adults in New South Wales are now fully vaccinated. Ms Berejiklian says she's concerned about super spreader events and non-complacency with the slight easing of restrictions today. Parents with children aged between 12 and 15 can now book them in for a COVID-19 vaccine through GPs and vaccination hubs. The state government has confirmed compensation will be paid after it cancelled the tender process to find a development partner for the Western Harbour Tunnel. And Australia's Daniel Ricciardo has claimed victory in the Italian Formula One Grand Prix at Monza. More news in half an hour.
Inspiring audiobooks from some of Australia's most beloved storytellers are now free to stream on the ABC Listen app.
This isn't just my story. This is the story of so many other young people.
The best homegrown fiction.
Tilly decided she would go back to Dungata.
Real-life Australian stories.
Some of what I've done has not been pretty to watch. Imagine what it was like to live through it.
And so much more.
This is paradise.
A great range of audiobooks free to stream on the ABC Listen app. This is Conversations with Richard Fidler on ABC Radio.
John Safran is back on Conversations today. John's here because he's taken an interest in smoking, or not smoking, as the case may be. John's new book is called Puff Peace, How Philip Morris Set Vaping Alight and Burned Down the English Language. It began in 2018 when John discovered that the tobacco giant Philip Morris International declared it was moving away from cigarettes and embracing a smoke-free future for the world. That it wanted to help, yes, help, to wean smokers off the cigarettes that they make and onto a new thing, a device that gives you your nicotine fix from a heat stick. Not a cigarette, but a heat stick. But it's still made from tobacco. John soon found that Philip Morris were behind a whole lot of health initiatives cropping up all over the world that looked like conventional quit campaigns but were designed to encourage people onto this new device, which is not a vape and which still, despite everything, creates tar, or nicotine-free dry particulate matter, as Philip Morris calls it. So, John, you went to a vaping expo in New Zealand with a group of people in the vaping industry. That's where you met some people from Philip Morris. What happened when you approached them?
Yeah, well, I had to get on a plane to New Zealand because Philip Morris, when I first was interested in this story, I contacted them and said, oh, listen, I'd like to write about your smoke-free future. And they're like, oh, John, we'd love you to come on in. That would be great. You can talk to whoever you want. We can show you whatever you want or whatever. So I was like, oh, my God, this is easy. So I run off to my publisher and I pitch them the book. Oh, my God, they're going to give me access behind the scenes and everything. And they said, yeah, okay, cool. And, they signed me on to do it. Then I noticed Philip Morris haven't got back to me in a while. So I contact them again and I go, when can I come in? And they said, yeah, actually we've had another think about it. And no. And so then I was like, oh my God, you jerks. Because I just went to my publisher and got a book deal based on this. And now you've left my ass flapping in the wind. So, and then I noticed that they were going to have a stall at this vape expo in New Zealand, in Auckland, New Zealand. So I just got on a plane, went there, and then, what can they do? So I just, wandered up to the booth and asked some questions. And much to the chagrin of people in the vape industry, they'd got the prime real estate at the expo. So they had the biggest booth, and it was also right near the entrance. So you almost could not walk into this vape expo without walking through the Philip Morris heat stick booth. And people into vaping are kind of a bit annoyed that got cigarette companies getting involved because it makes it all murkier. But having said that, the people who work for Philip Morris, especially the younger ones, they truly believe that they're helping the world get people off cigarettes. So they take the stuff that I've been sort of being a bit of a smart aleck about, they take it on face value and they'd say, no, this is good. The heat stick is less risky than a cigarette. There's all these people dying of cigarettes each year, and this will get people off cigarettes. And so they're very passionate and kind of Scientology themselves. That's why I enjoyed this world so much, because I like Scientologists. And everyone's kind of a Scientologist in this world.
So when you approached these people at the Philip Morris stand at the Vaping Expo in Auckland, did you put to them some of the info you'd gleaned about the amount of tar that's actually in these heat sticks that's been reported to the Food and Drug Administration in the United States?
Yeah, well, one of the tricks that they do when Philip Morris are trying to sell the idea that the heat stick, this is much healthier than a cigarette or less risky, is they talk about how their scientific boffins did these tests on things called harmful or potentially harmful components, constituents, that's the word I'm looking for. And it showed that out of the 58 harmful or potentially harmful constituents, they showed up in a much lower rate in a heat stick compared to a cigarette. So the mercury rate is so much lower. Out of all these 58 things, there's so much lower in a heat stick than in a cigarette. But here's the trick. There's more than 58 harmful and potentially harmful constituents in a cigarette smoke and a heat stick discharge. They just cherry-picked the 58 that showed up at a much lower rate in a heat stick, but there's all these other ones, and in some cases they showed up not only at a higher rate, but a much higher rate.
So you had this info, and what happens when you put that to the shiny, happy people at the Philip Morris stand?
They just talked around it. I kept on thinking, what do they do on 60 Minutes when this happens? Because I just said what I said to you, but I was flustered even more, so I probably sounded like a lunatic. But yeah, the young guy, and he was a really nice guy. I liked him. But he was very emotional when he told his story about how the heat stick and the IQOS has really saved him, that he himself was addicted to cigarettes and this got him off it.
Well, was it like talking to members of a cult in that sense?
Well, I even said to him, I said, how do you know you're not in a cult? And he agreed that he gets caught up in it. And he just said he just remembers when the first numbers came in from Japan and that showed how, this many % of people had moved on from cigarettes to heat sticks, that he just felt quite emotional about it, that the work he was doing was worth it and consequential and good.
So back in Australia, someone from Philip Morris took you out to lunch. What did this person want? Why would a person do that with a John Safran? Why would he want to do that, John?
Well, they're in a bit of a bind on one level because they're totally deplatformed by anyone in the media with kind of like a conventional sense of ethics. People just will not talk to them like even when I do my press here, it's not like anyone's going to be going around going, well, this is what John says. Let's give Philip Morris a platform or whatever, right? So I'm the only person, because I'm a lunatic, who I think I should talk to them, and I don't mind giving them, I don't mind platforming them. And they've got this strategy. You know how creationists, like Christian fundamentalists, they wanted to teach creationism in the science class, and the educators just said, listen, we're not going to teach that because it's not legit. It's not legitimate. And then they came up with this ingenious piece of rhetoric, the creationists, where it's like, teach the controversy. Yeah, like, yes, you can say why we're wrong or whatever. And that's like how they're getting a little bit of a foothold into the world. So Philip Morris have the same thing which they're trying out, which no one falls for except for me, where it's like, teach the controversy. And because my book, it's teaching the controversy. So I have no idea. They might like what I'm doing because it's like, well, John's explaining this thing that no one knows about yet. And even though it just sounds really bad, it's like better than nothing or something. So I just think they thought, well, no one else is ringing them.
So what happened at this lunch?
Well, I was pretty excited because there was a slight hint when I was at their booth in New Zealand. The woman who worked for Philip Morris, she did drop this kind of coded thing which could have been interpreted one way or the other, where it was like, hang on, did you just like suggest you might like pay for me to go on a junket to your headquarters in Switzerland? And I was going, oh, that'd be kind of cool or whatever. And then in the lunch, yes, it was, do you want to go to this, the Cube is what they call it, in Switzerland? And
now that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Cube, you got an offer to go to visit the Cube. What in Switzerland? What is the Cube in Switzerland?
Well, that's where they do all their science. It might also be their think tank area, I think. I don't know. Definitely it's like the science often bit, and I think maybe it's also, where they think up all their really clever things.
Okay, and when that was offered to you, what did you say?
Oh, I said yes. I could not believe my luck. I could not believe my luck that I was doing this book on how Philip Morris just get their tentacles in everywhere and try to bend things in their favour. And so I was like, oh my God, and now they're doing it to me. I just could not believe my luck.
Like John, like I said at the start, everything about them these days suggests that they're trying to look like Apple, rather than a tobacco company. Is that something correct. You noticed?
Yeah, definitely. Their vice president was at a conference, like a tech conference, a couple of years ago, and she introduced herself as, I'm senior vice president of the science and tech startup, Philip Morris.
Oh.
And because this IQOS has a computer chip in it, she can say that. And the employees feel really good because they're not working at a cigarette company, they're working at a science and tech startup.
So the IQOS is sort of like an iPhone that you suck on, essentially.
Yeah, the packaging is like an iPhone, and it's got the I in front of it, like iPhone. But then also they have these dedicated stores across Europe, and they've opened a couple in America too. And according to people who've gone there, it's like you just walk past it and you think it's the Apple store. But get how ingenious Philip Morris are by the fact that they get to say we're not a cigarette company anymore, even though, by the way, just to be clear, they sell 800 billion cigarettes a year. So they sell the cigarettes wherever, to the hilt, wherever they can still sell them. This, like IQOS, is like for areas where that's no longer sustainable, either for legal reasons or social reasons. But because I've got this heat sticker, this IQOS, which they say isn't a cigarette, and because they're saying they're trying to get people onto that, they can say, we're not a cigarette company, we're a company that gets people off cigarettes. So the people who work for Philip Morris, they have that story to tell their friends at dinner parties. Compared to the other cigarette giants, if you work for British American Tobacco or Imperial Brands, which are the other two big ones, you've got to say you work at a cigarette company. But at Philip Morris, you get to say and you get to believe that you're not working at a cigarette company. You're working at a company that's trying to end cigarettes. You're working at a science and tech startup. It's so ingenious. If we were all as smart as Philip Morris, I'm telling you, we'd all be living on the moon by now.
So you didn't get to go to the Cube in Switzerland because of COVID, and you were stuck inside your apartment.
Yeah.
Were you furious about that, John?
I was. Well, when I was having the lunch with him, it was a very nice restaurant, and something occurred to me at some point. I was like, where's his phone? And then I started getting paranoid. I'm going, oh my God, is his phone like in his pocket? And he's like recording this whole conversation, and it's going to be used against me at some future point. And it was too late then. I'd accepted the junket there. And I was thinking, oh, my God, he's got me on tape accepting the junket. Like, he's going to be able to, like, use this against me somehow. And then, when COVID happened and the lockdown, and then I got the message from the dude. And a very nice guy, by the way. All these people are nice. He said to me, Ollie, obviously, because of lockdown, like, it's off. Like, you're not going to be able to go to Switzerland anymore. And I just thought, oh, my God, it's the worst of both worlds, because I'm not going to get to go on the junket to the Switzerland, but also it's probably got me on tape accepting this junket. So, like I'm morally compromised, at least by conventional understanding of that. I'm journalistically compromised, but I didn't even get the benefit of being compromised. So, yeah, it was the worst of both worlds.
John, you revealed the existence of an organisation that I'd never heard of called PMI Impact. What is PMI Impact? What do they do?
So it's a branch of Philip Morris, or a project of Philip Morris, and they're funding law enforcement projects around the world. On a nominal level, they want to crack down on illegal cigarette smuggling, and, man, there's something to discuss. Why is there an arm of law enforcement in America that on the one hand is funded by taxpayers, but on the other hand is also getting some supplementary money from Philip Morris International? And I just found this really interesting, because it was part of my, annoyance or something, that no one seemed to be... Philip Morris were just doing whatever they wanted and no one was noticing. And when it came to me finding out that Philip Morris were funding law enforcement around the world, I just kept on thinking how I've been on social media for months, because this was when the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and everyone, like all my lefty friends, are like, defund the police, and everything's defund the police, defund the police. And I'm like, my God, Philip Morris, on top of everything else, they're funding the police, and no one's noticed. No one's like outside the Philip Morris building going, why are you funding the police? So this was like just this other piece of the puzzle where it's like Philip Morris just does all this wildly controversial stuff that certainly should be up for discussion, but somehow they just do it and no one notices. And I realised that part of the reason was that cigarettes sounds like such a 1970s issue. Like, if you think of like the zeitgeist issues, you have like Black Lives Matter and #MeToo and trans rights and all these things, which are, cool, and then you've got like cigarettes, and it just seems like it's like I've got sideburns from the 1970s, and it's like, as an issue, it's like a yellowing Winfield ad in a women's weekly in a box in a garage that's been left there for decades. Like that's what cigarettes seems like as an issue, the opposite of the zeitgeist. But here's the problem: is that for like the cancer cells growing in your body, like it's very zeitgeist for that. There's nothing. It's very topical. So much money is spent, like even in Australia, and it's all got to do with cigarettes. So it's totally zeitgeist on those levels. It's just not zeitgeist on some other level.
You met a cigarette smuggler, someone who tried to smuggle cigarettes and had succeeded a few times and got pinged on the third attempt. Tell me about him and what's in it for the smuggler who wants to bring in suitcases full of cigarettes from Vietnam into Australia, John.
It's because the excise tax is so high on cigarettes, so it's like the money that goes to the government per pack, that it's worth it to smuggle cigarettes and try to get away with it. And then the laws changed quite recently, but before quite recently, it was a pretty clever crime to do, because if you smuggle in cigarettes, or until quite recently, and you're busted, you can just throw them out. And so you've lost the money, but yet you haven't been arrested or anything. And then the other thing is you can pay the duty on them. So, and compare that with smuggling marijuana or something. It's like, once you're caught smuggling marijuana at the airport, they're not like, oh, well, hang on, if you just throw that in the bin, or you've just paid duty on that, it'll be fine. So it was like this really clever crime where you're probably going to get away with it. Just say you do it 10 times, 9 times, they're just going to let you through and not bother. And then the 10th time when they bust you, it's like, just throw it out. And it's hard to know how many people are smoking anymore, because there's such a agenda to not buy your cigarettes officially over the counter at the 7-Eleven, to try to get black market ones, because They're just going to be so much cheaper.
Does Philip Morris even care whether this cigarettes are being smuggled across the border to Australia? Is that of any interest to them?
Well, obviously on the surface level, they will say that they care, and maybe they do. But there's one university group who does research into this matter, and their opinion was that because excise goes directly to the government, so Philip Morris doesn't get their hands on it, all the tobacco giants, they don't really care that much about whether you buy your cigarettes in Vietnam or Australia, because they're largely going to get the same amount either way, because the incredible difference in price is all just down to the excise tax that goes to the government that Philip Morris or the other tobacco companies aren't going to see anyway. So there is an argument that the big tobacco companies don't mind that kind of smuggling that much because they're still getting the sale when the guy buys it in Vietnam. And then furthermore, in Australia, if people are just going to not smoke at all because it's too expensive and they're not going to be able to afford the cigarettes from the supermarkets or from the convenience store, it's like, well, if they're buying it via this kind of dodgy method, that's still better than nothing. That's still a sale for us.
So it seems like the upshot of this is that Philip Morris has started this Unsmoke the World campaign. It wants to shift smokers, it says, from cigarettes that it's been making for however many years to this new thing, this new platform, if that's the word for it, an IQOS with a heat stick inside of it. But this is something that still delivers 2/3 of the amount of tar as a normal cigarette would to people, which is the most carcinogenic aspect of the original cigarette. Do you wonder about how people who work for that company do that, what stories they tell themselves about what they're doing, whether they care or they've found a kind of moral platform for what they do?
Yeah, no, I totally spoke to people who still think the heat stick is not a cigarette, and so therefore this campaign is getting people off cigarettes. And I know this might sound baffling to people outside their bubble, but they really do. It's like they think they're working for Greenpeace. They're doing something that has good, especially the young people I spoke to. I spoke to this woman who had worked at Philip Morris, and she said they could just smoke heat sticks around the office, but if you wanted to smoke a cigarette, you had to go to the tea room and smoke it in there. She said that in the office, the people who were smoking heat sticks would judge the people who were smoking cigarettes and say, how can you still be smoking cigarettes? Don't you know what we're trying to do? We're trying to get people off these awful things, and you're smoking a cigarette in the tea room here at Philip Morris. And so they really bought into it and just thought they were on a social justice mission.
You were kind of interested in the whole idea of whether existentially Philip Morris workers were going to hell, and you
yeah.
and you went to your two chief spiritual counsellors for this, which is Father Bob, a Catholic priest, and Rabbi Gutnick in Melbourne. What did they tell you?
Well, yeah, that's what I went to them straight away, because when I started researching this, I was reading under a YouTube video, like a corporate video for Philip Morris. People were like, if you work for Philip Morris, you're going to hell. And so I just thought, oh, okay, I'll suss out whether that's true or not. So yes, I went to the priest and I went to the rabbi. And I said, is this breaking the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill, if you work at Philip Morris, because you're selling cigarettes and heat sticks and it's going to kill people? And Rabbi Gutnick said, he says, no, because you're not forcing them down anyone's throats. And he said, thou shalt not kill actually means thou shalt not murder. Therefore, if a killing isn't actually a murder, so self-defense, for instance, or accident, or if it's an accident, that's not a murder. You're just involved in a killing, and therefore you're not breaking the 7th commandment. And also, Father Bob, I couldn't get him because he's like really old school, and so he didn't even really know what I was on about. Like, yeah, of course people can smoke if they want to smoke, and he said you've got to understand that people have complicated reasons for why they do things, even if they do something that seems like from the outset to look like it's bad. So he gave the example of, like, just say a woman speeding in her car and she runs someone over and kills them, and then everyone's going to be going, oh my God, that woman, how could she do that? And she's killed someone, she's really evil or whatever. But then it comes out in the court case that, oh, she was fleeing from domestic violence, and that's why she was in the car, she was getting out of the house or whatever. Then suddenly go, oh, because of that, I guess that makes the killing a bit different. So somehow, don't ask me, Bob equated that woman fleeing domestic violence with people who are working at Philip Morris not being murderers because you know that they might just be trying to earn a living for their family and things like that.
As part of the process, you said you wanted to consume a fair bit of tobacco in one form or another, whether it's through the IQOS or through nicotine gum and all that. Did you get addicted?
The closest I did, I'd kind of get briefly addicted, which I guess, is that addicted or can't you get briefly addicted? Like when I smoked the vape for the first time, I did it for 40 minutes and then I had to repower it. I was kind of agitated. I was like, oh, damn. Like I'd become addicted within 40 minutes. I was like, do I really have to like not have this in my mouth and plugged into the wall for an hour now? God damn it. But then it'd be like the next week and I'd realise I'd forgotten about it. So clearly I wasn't like addicted. I was really into it, but it's so hard to tell whether you're addicted or you're just enjoying something. So I thought I'd try out nicotine chewing gum that you can get from chemists. And I was chewing that. I felt I was sort of getting addicted to it. But this nicotine gum is both tasteless but kind of disgusting at the same time. And then one day I was thinking, oh my God, because the way the vape industry works with all their juice, they always make these wacky flavours. It's custard fuzz vape juice and it's blueberry cake vape juice. And it's all this sort of like mixing these kind of colourful flavours in with the nicotine vape steam. So I just thought, oh my God, why don't I do that with this nicotine gum? Like I'll go and get some like Hubba Bubba, I'll get some like watermelon extra and all that kind of stuff. And I'll do what the vapors do, but do it with nicotine gum. And then I checked on the internet because I was going, oh, surely someone else has thought of this before. And it just hasn't been done before. And I was like, oh my God, I've invented a new form of drug taking. And I called it juicy fruiting. And it's like, so what it is, it's where you mix, you do your whole thing, just like the vapors do with mixing their vape juice with all these wacky flavours. Yeah, like I invented juicy fruiting where I had like watermelon extra, putting it with the nicotine and like working out the proportions that make it the best. And then I was like chewing that. This was during lockdown, right? And so I think I was going a bit mad as well. And yeah, I did enjoy juicy fruiting. Although because I hadn't really had nicotine in my life yet, it kind of I had to run for the bucket is what I'm saying. So
oh God, my God, you came so close to invent. Well, maybe you have invented the kind of nicotine equivalent of an Alco-Pop or something like that. Ultimately, this is in some ways, it's a question of health, public health, but it's also a question about words and how slippery they're becoming.
Yeah.
This is not just confined to this particular issue. What do you think about all that, John, about the slipperiness of words and how the world we live in can sort of be just subtly redefined just by little tweaks here and there around the edges?
Yeah, I mean, as we discussed, it's insane. It's like cigarettes are banned. I'll change the word cigarette for heat stick. Change the word smoke to aerosol. And because look at that, like at the moment, in some places of Australia, it's like it's no smoking even in outdoor areas. So hang on. So what does that mean for this heat stick? That I think it kind of looks like smoke coming out of it, but they've changed the word to aerosol. And it's like, okay, well, who knows? Maybe you can heat stick in places where you can't smoke. And so it's so wild, the consequences of changing these words. So, yeah.
It's a strange world we live in. John, always wonderful to speak with you. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
John Safran is the author of a new book called Puff Peace, How Philip Morris Set Vaping Alight and Burned Down the English Language.
Where do they go, the smoke rings I blow each night? Oh, what do they do, those circles of blue and white? Why do they seem to picture a dream above then? Why do they fade that phantom parade of love?
Today's conversation with John Safran will be available for you soon on our website and as a podcast. I'm Richard Feidler. Thanks for listening.
Keep
up to date with ABC Radio.
Local stories.
Local news.
Local programs.
On your radio, on your mobile and online 24/7.
Get all the latest with ABC Radio. Anywhere, anytime.
It's 12 o'clock. Good afternoon. Tony Matthews with ABC News. There were 1,257 new COVID cases and another 7 deaths in New South Wales in the latest reporting period. Danuta Kazaki reports.
A woman in her 60s from Sydney's southwest has died in Campbelltown Hospital, along with several deaths among people in aged care. Premier Gladys Berejiklian says vaccination rates are starting to slow and has warned against complacency. Nurse Danielle Austin from Sydney's St Vincent's Hospital says it was great to see young people queuing for the Pfizer vaccine for the first time.
We opened our doors to children aged 12 years and over at our hub, and I can tell you it was a delightful thing to see those children in our queue.
There are nearly 1,200 people in hospital with COVID, including 222 in intensive care.
The ABC can reveal the New South Wales government waited to announce Sydney's citywide lockdown until 2 days after health authorities realised they'd failed to contain a super spreader event in the city's southwest. Answers to questions on notice to a parliamentary inquiry reveal New South Wales Health knew on June the 24th it had failed to contain a COVID cluster linked to a birthday party at Hoxton Park. Authorities believed they had isolated all guests, but discovered that day that several more attendees were still in the community. The government announced a lockdown only for Sydney's city and east on June the 25th, but waited till the following day to extend it to Greater Sydney because of the West Hoxton cluster. The ACT has recorded 13 new locally acquired cases of COVID-19 overnight, and New Zealand has reported 33 cases of coronavirus. The Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt is confident authorities could approve COVID-19 vaccines for young children